We are delighted and grateful to welcome you to the 2021 Loyola Commitment to Justice Signature Speaker Series. Every year, Loyola's Commitment to Justice Committee creates a panel that helps deepen understanding of and commitment to justice. We work with partners across campus to help integrate this panel into events, curricula, and conversation all year. The hope is that what we hear tonight opens a doorway to a new way of seeing justice. And then we hope that we might all go forth inspired to learn more, to participate in ongoing discussions on campus and beyond, and to contribute to even better futures, both at Loyola and in all the places where we live and work. We want to thank Acting Provost and Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dr. Cheryl Moore-Thomas, Associate Vice President for Undergraduate Academic Affairs and Faculty Development, Dr. Cindy Moore, and Equity and Inclusion Faculty Fellow, Dr. Mariana Carlucci. We are grateful to the Office of the Provost and Vice President of Academic Affairs for their ongoing commitment to justice at Loyola and for helping this panel to be possible. We're deeply grateful to Messina for being long-term co-sponsors for the Loyola Commitment to Justice. We thank and honor our other co-sponsors, including Common Text, CCSJ, and Campus Ministry. We welcome you to listen with openness, intellectual curiosity, and respect for our panelists. It is my great pleasure to welcome and introduce our moderator, who will then introduce our panelists. Reverend Scott Hamilton Adams serves as the Assistant Director of Interfaith and Ecumenical Ministries at Loyola University Maryland. He leads the university's interfaith initiatives towards cultivating safe and empowering spaces for faith, educating the community around religious diversity, and providing co-curricular experiences that complement and contextualize Loyola's Jesuit education. Additionally, he serves as a liaison between the university and faith communities and organizations in Baltimore. Finally, Reverend Scott serves as Loyola's ecumenical minister and is responsible for developing, supporting, and affirming Loyola's Protestant Christian community through worship services, programming, spiritual development, and education. Reverend Scott currently serves as the senior pastor of Heritage United Church of Christ, where he is committed to the mission of love, justice, liberation, and peace. He received his master's degree from Duke University School of Divinity, holds a master's degree in theology from St. Mary's Seminary, and a bachelor's degree in psychology from James Madison University. Reverend Scott believes that his greatest achievement is being a husband and a father. He and his wife, Tanya, are the proud parents of two sons, Ray and Scotty. Reverend Scott, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. And welcome to the Commitment to Justice panel here at Loyola University. As I was already introduced, my name is Reverend Scott Adams, and I serve as the Assistant Director of Interfaith and Ecumenical Ministries. To briefly frame our conversation tonight, our hope is to address some of the most important issues as it relates to the prison industrial complex. We are currently seeking greater understanding of how Loyola University Maryland might effectively grapple with the injustices of mass incarceration, including, but not limited to, issues of race, policies and legislation, policing, reentry, family, to say the least. And how can we, is the question, as a Jesuit Catholic university anchored in Baltimore City, support those who are justice involved, as well as our community partners who are committed to this work. Tonight, we're excited to have a dynamic group of special individuals who have graciously accepted the invitation to share their stories, their experiences, wisdom, and expertise to discuss how the social reality of mass incarceration has affected their lives. Their voices must be heard, and more importantly, their voices will lead the conversation, as they have either been directly impacted by the American carceral system or are intimately engaged in the work of justice in the institutionalized system of incarceration. As such, their voices, their stories, their commitment, and all of the things that they're doing in terms of their service have the power to change the dehumanizing and stigmatizing narratives that are perpetuated by a society that is deeply indoctrinated by a fear of the mystical or mythical criminalized so-called super predators, most of whom are from Black and brown communities. Tonight, we will engage in a deep conversation on how those of us who are committed to seeing the manifestation of beloved community may practically and meaningfully contribute to positive change in Baltimore and beyond, and how we can, in the words of Dr. Cornel West, take this moment, get some momentum, and potentially create a movement to fight for justice and liberation from the traumatic and devastating effects of mass incarceration. I am pleased to introduce our panel at this time. We are excited and again, thankful for all of you who have come tonight to take the time on this Monday evening in the midst of this global pandemic to share in this space with us. And we are honored and privileged to have you here. Our first panelist is Mr. Will Elmore. Considered someone with expertise in the transformative process that begins with grievous error through maximum security incarceration into community membership. Will is a formerly incarcerated man who can inform us on facing extreme powerlessness and finding a way to true selfhood. Will share his inspirational story about faith and redemption and how he was able to have a second chance at freedom after a natural life sentence. William Elmore has a story of truth, challenges, and consequences that transcends 24 and a half years of controlled time and restricted space. His affirmation of self-acceptance began with genuine and unconditional remorse. Steering his way through the fast pace of hustling with childhood friends was a catalyst into a maze of dire choices and ultimate decisions. March 30th, 1991 would prove to be that day in which he would need to exercise true critical thinking and a decision-making skill that most of us lack. One fragile, miscalculated moment in the time resulted in William receiving a guilty verdict of first-degree murder and a natural life sentence rendered by the state of North Carolina. On December 21st, 2015, at age 44, William Elmore was released from Orange County Correctional Center in Hillsborough, North Carolina, after serving 24 and a half years. He currently sits on the board of EMPP and Straight Talk Support Group and works with the School for Conversion and RSN. Amen. Freedom Fox Richardson, born into an incarcerated family from Shreveport, Louisiana. The oldest of twins and fourth oldest of sons, Freedom Fox Richardson has become known throughout our state as the one to watch. When his mother was 3 months pregnant with him and his twin brother, Freedom Fox Richardson's father, was sentenced to 61 years in prison. Then at merely 10 months old, his mother was sent to prison for 7 years, making Freedom all too familiar with the systems and roadblocks that have been created to hinder poor and disadvantaged youth and their communities. Instead of simply identifying the problem and talking about it, Freedom has committed his life to being a part of the solution. James Allen said it best: circumstances don't make us, they reveal who we really are. When Richardson's family needed extra financial support due to their father's decade of continued incarceration and legal battles to unite their family, family, Freedom made the decision to leave school at age 14 for his family. At 16, he got his high school diploma, equivalency document, and started college at Tulane University. Once there, Loyola University became impressed with his determination and perseverance and awarded him a full merit scholarship in 2017. This politically astute young man does not stand on the sideline and talk about change. He's involved with many organizations that are seeking to end mass incarceration, raise the minimum wage, and provide free college tuition to all. It is this work that led him to receive the Marguerite Casey Foundation Youth Warrior Against Poverty Award and Loyola University's highest student honor, the Magis Award for Outstanding Student Leadership in 2019. He also served as Loyola University's Student Government Association President, currently working as a Hill staffer in Washington, D.C., helping to assist his home state of Louisiana in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida. Freedom is building a track record of service that is destined to land him in one of our nation's highest offices. His family, having endured the past 21 years and 4 days of incarceration, would lead many to the breaking point and force them to give up. But Freedom Richardson learned early on the value of fighting for your life and your family by any means necessary. It is because of this experience and his never give up attitude that allowed his family to gain clemency for his father from Governor John Bell Edwards, which soon led to his father's release from prison in September 2019 and landed his family's documentary film Time, an Oscar nomination. In spite of the hardships his family faced, Freedom Richardson has used these circumstances to do more, be more, and serve more. Failure is not an option. Instead, Freedom's motto in life is success is the best revenge, and with God, all things are possible. Next, we have Erica Suter, an attorney and director of the Innocence Project Clinic. The Innocence Clinic is a joint project of the Maryland Office of Public Defender and the University of Baltimore. In addition to being director of the clinic and professor of the practice, she is also an assistant public defender. In 2008, the University of Baltimore School of Law and the Maryland Office of the Public Defender collaborated on the creation of an Innocence Project Clinic. The clinic seeks to identify individuals who have been convicted in Maryland state courts of crimes that they did not commit and to provide them with the assistance in the investigation of their claims. In appropriate cases, representation will be provided in post-trial litigation, efforts to secure exoneration. The clinic is run by an experienced criminal defense attorney with expertise in DNA and other forms of scientific evidence who has secured the exoneration of numerous individuals in the course of her career. The past 10 years, running her own firm, Erica has obtained relief for 10 clients who were serving life sentences and reduced term of year sentences by 232 years. Dr. Natka Bianchini is the head of the theater program and associate professor of theater in the Visual and Performing Arts Department at Loyola, where she teaches directing, theater history, and dramatic literature. She is also a director of more than 30 productions, both on and off campus, and the author of 2 scholarly books. In the fall of 2019, she was an affiliate instructor at Goucher College in their Prison Education Partnership, GPEP, and taught a seminar on America Drama for 25 students at the Maryland Correctional Institute for Men in Jessup, Maryland. Let us take a moment to welcome and honor our panelists and guests tonight. So we're going to get right to it. We're going to move because we have a long way to go in a short amount of time. And we want to also have the audience to receive opportunities to ask questions after our panelists have their opportunity to share. So the first question that we would like to address today is addressed to all of you. And each of you have encountered incarceration from a different perspective. Would you just take a moment to describe your particular experience of incarceration and the accompanying thoughts, feelings, and emotions that it brings up for you? We can begin. Do we have our guests on Zoom? Okay. We can begin with anyone who wants to take that question first.
What's up, Scott? How is everybody?
Good, man. Good to see you, Will. That's my friend, Will Elmore in North Carolina.
It's my pleasure to be here. Oh, what was the journey like? Is that basically your question?
Yeah. Yes. What was the journey and what is the was it?
In more ways than one, it was uphill all the way. Lots of twists and turns. It was a marathon. It wasn't a sprint. And so much about the journey is contingent upon the length of one sentence, the location, how far one may be housed in proximity to their loved ones. Me, myself being from New Jersey, being told to spend the rest of my life here in North Carolina, not knowing anyone, I liken it to be feeling like a refugee in a whole nother land where the rules were different, the culture was different, and just the basic operations were set up differently than what I was accustomed to. So it took so much critical thinking and so much of my faith to give me the insight and the divine wisdom to kind of navigate myself through a reality that said, this is where you'll be the rest of your living days. So it was uphill all the way, and it challenged every bit of me. You know what it was like? It was like being in a fiery furnace. Well, only thing that will remain is what's real and what's true and what's pure. Anything artificial or superficial was being challenged and kind of destroyed. So it really concentrated and squares all of the good juices out of me in a way that's necessary for my growth and development. But at the same time, as we may all know, it doesn't necessarily feel good while you're going through it.
Great. Thank you, Will, for sharing that. And it's good to see you. Will and I work together in North Carolina in an organization called Church Beyond the Walls, and I've had the opportunity to meet him, and his story is phenomenal. So thank you again, Will. I'm going to ask Freedom if he can come and share a little bit of his perspective from the context of his life and what incarceration brings up for you. Freedom, good to see you, and it's a pleasure to meet you.
Yes, it is good to be seen. First and foremost, I can't thank Loyola University Maryland for having me and for putting the spotlight and the focus of excessive incarceration on impacted peoples and impacted families. I think I can speak for a lot of us in this work when I say that our inability to solve the multifacetedness of mass incarceration isn't because enough studies and statistics and surveys don't exist. But I believe it's because we genuinely still aren't censoring the stories of impacted people. I believe, and some would say naively, that those that are closest to the pain should be closest to the power. Only then can we achieve serious problem solving. As you said in your introduction, my name is Freedom Richardson. I am a son, of not one, but two formerly incarcerated parents. as much as I would love to tell you my story and animate the introduction there, I think it would be a little bit more fitting for me to plug my family's film, Time, which is available on Amazon Prime. That was snubbed, dare I say, at the Oscars, but certainly an honor nonetheless to be nominated. To your question, when you talk about navigating this cycle of incarceration, for me, I was on the side of, I believe that whenever one person is incarcerated, unfortunately, our state and our system incarcerates the entire family, where not only is our loved one serving time, not only is our loved one, having to pay and incur expenses, fines and fees, but also our families. The money it takes to go drive up and to go see your loved one, to leave money on the books, to make sure that you're paying for cell phone calls in a day and age where, phone calls and minutes practically are unlimited. I know that certainly I am fortunate to have my father home, to have our family reunited in some instance. But I think that I share the concern of many incarceration impacted communities across our country when I say that my father's time isn't done. There's a lot that he's unlearning, having spent decades socialized in a heavily militarized environment. And despite my father receiving clemency from our state's governor, my father is still on paper for at least 40 years of parole, despite committing what many scholars believe was nothing more than a property crime. So there is still so much work to be done. And we can talk about it all day long, but I think it's important that each and every one of us ask ourselves, not only are we able to identify problems accurately, but let's make sure that we're engaging them intentionally and consulting with impacted communities as to how best we do that, to make sure that our approach is authentic, that it's genuine, and certainly that it produces tangible fruits. So again, thank you so much for having me. And I look forward to delving deeper in my experiences and that of some of even my co-panelists.
Excellent, Freedom. It's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you so much for being here this evening. And we look forward to hearing your story as well. Erica, from your perspective, would you like to share a little bit what incarceration brings up for you?
Sure. So I came to this work in about 2008. I started doing criminal defense work, and not just around innocence work, but around people who were wrongfully convicted, overly incarcerated, who had unfair lengthy sentences. That's sort of where my introduction came. And I'll say, especially to the students, that when I grew up, a first generation college student, didn't know any lawyers. Law school was super hard for me. It felt like such a culture shock. And I feel so fortunate and privileged to be in the position where I am now. And I feel like that's been an asset to me. When I was in law school, I was uncomfortable because I didn't know sort of, at these fancy dinners, the order of the forks and the knives and what I was supposed to touch. And it's been such an asset to me being able to connect with my clients and being able to connect with different people. My experience, which I thought was going to be a hindrance to me, not having this level of sort of exposure, has really become an asset in the way that I connect to people. And I'm so privileged. I was just, as Freedom was talking about how incarceration affects families. I was just the other day in preparing a pleading for one of my clients, talking to my client's brother about what it meant to him when they came and they took his big brother away. And it was so devastating to hear about the ripple effect that it has had on this family. And one of the blessings of my job is that I get to witness people's stories. And it is such an unbelievable, weighty, but privileged position to be able to witness people's stories and to have somebody trust you with their story, to carry it out, to share that with other people, and to try desperately to accurately represent somebody's humanity, that they're not simply, some of my clients are innocent, some of my clients are, have committed the thing of which they were convicted, but that they are so much more of a complicated human being. And being able to connect with my clients and being able to share their stories is one of my greatest joys.
Thank you so much. Dr. Bianchini, would you like to share for our opening round?
Just briefly, because I want to make sure I'm amplifying the panelists more than my own voice. But I was in the fall of 2019 when I was teaching at MCIJ, the men's prison I had students of, I didn't know anybody's age per se, but if I could guess, the students ranged in age from probably mid to late 20s to 60s. And we were discussing a contemporary play in class, and I just sort of offhand said something like, well, payphones, you can't find payphones anymore. And one of the older students in my class looked really startled. And I talked to him after class, and I was 41 at the time. And we're encouraged as faculty not to seek out or learn any information about our students in terms of their conviction or their sentence. So I wanted to respect that boundary, but I did sort of gently say, have you been here a long time? And he said, I've been here for 39 years.
Thank you for that. And as we continue to move through this conversation, we're going to hear these types of stories, hopefully, because the story, as Freedom shared with us, is really the impactful thing that allows us to have this conversation and to understand that when we think of most of the time, most of us who are dealing with the issue of mass incarceration, we have to understand that there's a dehumanizing and stigmatizing accompaniment when we think of this type of situation and criminality, and we're looking at all of these issues. And so the stories allow us to humanize the individuals who have had to endure this. And so my great respect for Will in working with him and all of these individuals, but Will particularly, because he's a good friend of mine, has shared his story, and I've seen the impact that it has on so many people. So tonight, that's what we're going to engage. My next question would be around the larger issue of mass incarceration, right? And most scholars and activists argue that mass incarceration is probably one of the most pressing civil rights issues of our time. What would you say are the beliefs and ideologies that underwrite the cultural reality of mass incarceration in this country? In other words, how did we get here? We're seeing the challenges around mass incarceration, and I want to know if you all can articulate and expand a little bit. How did we get to a point in our society where we're experiencing such a crisis in this idea of the prison industrial complex? Anyone can take this. And it's a little difficult. This is the first time we've done a hybrid type of panel discussion. So maybe if I can call on individuals, maybe that would be easier to answer these questions. So I'm gonna start with Freedom. Freedom, can you tell us a little bit about how we got here and what brought this behemoth situation and circumstance that we're facing in our society today?
For sure. So again, I think that you are asking the right question. I find that oftentimes in our assessment, in our analyzation of any social issue, we tend to look at the branch causes. It's the increase of crime, right? Or it's the violence perpetuated in video games is another talking point that I've heard quite commonly. But I think at the root of what spurred mass incarceration to the extent that we're seeing it today is two things. And I welcome the other panelists. Feel free to add or challenge perhaps my conclusion of this one. I think it's two things. One is the criminalization of poverty. I think that when we begin to see those that have less than us as less than, I think we are less considerate, less attentive, and certainly less convicted to do something about their shortcomings, about their shortfalls. Secondly, I think it is our continued disinvestment in education and access to opportunity. I heard someone once say there was a TED Talk that I was watching, and the gentleman, one of the moderators asks the participant, he says, I understand you got so much going on, and you always talk about race. At what point are we going to be done talking about race? And the participant says, he says, when I feels as if it stops impacting me in the way in which it doesn't impact you. And then he goes on to say, he says, as a Black man in America, he says, I'm not asking you to give me any upper leg or, an opportunity on a platter. He says, what I'm asking you to do is to minimize and eliminate the barrier. And so I think that's, excuse me, I think that's largely how we got here. We criminalized poverty in ways in which we should have responded to it by providing mental health and educational attainment opportunities and after school programs, things of that nature to folks whenever we saw that they were perhaps making a mistake. And then, the investments towards education. In the state of Louisiana, particularly, there was a constitutional amendment. It's called the Balanced Budget Amendment. In order to make sure that our state is required to produce a balanced budget every year, we can divest in everything in our economy, everything. The one thing that has not been divested from, despite education being on the chopping block, healthcare being on the chopping block, is the Department of Corrections budget. At least in the past 16 years, there have been reductions to every budget line item: education, healthcare, after school programs, nutritional programs. It has not been done to the Department of Corrections. So I think that whenever we begin to eliminate barriers to opportunity, and whenever we begin to address the root causes of poverty and not just react with a punitive and an extremely prosecutorial response, I think then we'll find, one, where we started, and two, how best we can proceed from there.
Great. Thank you so much, Freedom, for that deep and wonderful analysis of what we're seeing and how we got here. I want to turn to Will real quickly and ask, in relation to this question, Will, as someone who is directly impacted by mass incarceration, what would you say is the most pressing need of those who have been incarcerated and who are currently incarcerated? What would you say is the most pressing and urgent need?
Therapy, psychological, spiritual, emotional therapy. And from being where I was for almost 25 years and seeing a semblance of the mindset and the spiritual disposition where so many of my peers have been in and out of institutions, and having spent some time in poor communities, urban communities, and seeing the same mindset of those who have never been handcuffed or inside a place with barbed wires and armed guards, there's a I don't know, a consistent mentality that's has the ingredients of struggling to make it day by day, feeling like you're under a system or a regime that won't allow you to get where you deserve to go, and also power and control being expressed or enforced by law enforcement. It's so much of it is a mindset, and number one, to become aware of it is necessary, and number two, to feel worthy enough to put the work in to try to transcend or change your individual mindset and try to model what that mindset may look like, along with all these realities that I just described that are still here right now beside me and beside you. And therapy is in the Black communities, therapy is typically frowned upon and looked at as a white people thing. White people go to therapists and white people go talk to somebody on their couch. However, I stand in opposition to that mindset, and I represent, as a Black male and mass incarceration being primarily Black first and then brown second, I modeled the importance of how good quality therapy can help a person see themselves differently and help a person be involved in their own growth and development, regardless of what type of trauma they may have been through. And I stress that incarceration is traumatic, and it does not provide therapy. It's punitive. It's to punish you, it's to isolate you, it's to put you back and sit you away. And when you get out of prison, or if you haven't been to prison, you've been struggling from day to day with how to make ends meet, you feel pushed back, you already still feel isolated, and you feel like, you know, your voice don't matter. And only time it matters is when you're around like-minded people and you could complain about how the world is towards you and how you can't never get ahead. So when I become objective and I listen in on these conversations and I throw a question in the circle and I step back and see what kind of answers come out, I remind people how healthy and important therapy is. And sometimes the people in those circles turn to me and say, well, what do you think? How do you deal with it? And I tell them, look, I have a few disciplines that I learned. I had 25 years of unbroken up practice, uninterrupted practice, nonstop. And I tried many of things to comfort myself and analyze myself and figure out how I could maintain some measure of sanity in that type of environment. And I say, I don't poo-poo or minimize therapy. And we, again, our part of our cultures is, man, I'm all right no matter what happens to me. If I'm poor, if I get shot, if I go to jail, I'm gonna be good regardless. And because I'm tough like that. And I ask people, how is that working for you? How is that helping you? How is that changing the quality of your life or the quality of your character? And then that opens up a conversation about the necessary therapy that we need, however we get it. Prison, mass incarceration, prison in particular, in a symbolic way, is similar to the police officer with his knee on George Floyd's neck, snuffing him out. Incarceration has snuffed our voice out enough to where when you wear something unfashionable long enough, you tend to try to make it fashionable. You adjust the sleeves, you adjust the shoulders, you start to get it tailor-made to your dimensions. And we have done that with prison in our music, in our movies, in our culture. Now tell me, does that not require therapy where we start to model that as that's just comes with us being us? That's crazy to me, for lack of a better word. But that's how, you know me, Scott, I'm going to call it how it needs to be called. And that's crazy. So I'm quick to go door to door and tell my friends, hey, man, listen, we've taken this thing, man. We've taken junk food and made it into a delicacy. We've had to do that since slavery, right? So now we've taken a lot of these other things and meshed them into our culture and made them fashionable. We tattoo them on our bodies. That's just something is not right. Psych with your psyche. Something is not right for you to accept that that's just our plight. That comes along with us being us. And I say therapy in a word.
Thanks, Will, for that deep. Yeah, give it up. You broke down a lot of things, as you always do. Thank you for that. And so as we delve deeper into this, we've been hearing from Will and Freedom. I want to turn now to Erica, our attorney, our resident attorney here today, and ask you a question about the macro issue that we're facing in mass incarceration. The 13th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States of America explicitly states, and I quote, "Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude," and here's the operative word, "except as a punishment for crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." Again, the operative word, except. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude is legal except as a punishment, and we'll talk about this, as a punishment for crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States. This means that slavery is constitutionally justifiable human social punishment for those who have been convicted of a crime. And many argue that mass incarceration is merely just a byproduct of a larger systemic structural issue. So the question that I have for you, Erica, today is, how can we help recognize and transform the legacies of slavery, segregation, Jim Crow, and racism in their ongoing effects on people in our communities today?
Wow, that's a big question. So I think it is painfully obvious, right, that there is a through line from slavery to our mass incarceration crisis. It is undeniable. And, you know, when you look at Maryland in particular, Maryland has the dubious honor of being the #1 state. We lock up more of our Black population than any other state in the nation. So 70% of the incarcerated population in Maryland are Black. And that doesn't happen by accident. We didn't get here by accident. So, and then the other thing that you should know is that over 80% of our juvenile lifers, so individuals who were under 18 at the time of the crime, over 80% of that population is Black in Maryland. There are about 300 individuals right now in Maryland serving life sentences for crimes that were committed when they were juveniles as young as 15 years old. So we didn't get here by accident, and we don't get out of this by accident. And we all have sort of a responsibility. One of the things that has happened in Maryland last legislative session is that we passed something called the Juvenile Restoration Act. So now juveniles, men and women in Maryland who were convicted of crimes when they were children, committed when they were children, have the opportunity to go back. Actually, the law was enacted, it went into effect October 1st. To go back and seek a modification of sentence. So those 300 individuals will have the opportunity to go back. There are 11 factors that the court must consider, including sort of all of the neuroscience that we know about we know from the Supreme Court cases that talk about how the way that your mind develops, you know, when you're 18 or 19 or 20, it actually goes all the way up to 25, is not the impulse control, the appreciation of risk, the ability to be influenced by others, the ability to control your environment, all of those things evolve over time. I think most of us, well, you guys are so young, but I'm not the same person that I was at 18 or 19 or 20 or 25. But that's really just scratching the surface, right? Going back, reaching back, and getting people who are under 18 is just scratching the surface. We all need to be involved with our local politics. We need to put money behind the people in the legislature who are enacting change. We need to testify in the Senate and the House. We need to take up the mantle as our own individual personal responsibility to go in and to donate, to fundraise, to testify. If you are an impacted person, if you are connected, we need to amplify the voices of impacted people. There's a million different ways to come at this problem, but it's not a thing that will ever change by us sort of sitting back and witnessing, this is really bad. People are suffering. There are a lot of ways that everybody in this room can become involved and to make a difference. There's a fundraiser right now for impacted people, just getting people to be able to have money on their commissaries in Maryland. That particular organization is run by a woman who's married to someone who's serving a life sentence. I mean, if you're incarcerated, the basic daily things that you need, if you don't have a family member who's supporting you, who's giving you money so that you can buy food or toilet paper or whatever, you're going without. So there are so many different ways to become involved and to help try to create change.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So in piggybacking on Erica's comment, Freedom, I want to go to you. And I believe you're on the Hill, if I'm not mistaken. My question to you, Freedom, then is, based on what Erica has just said, how can citizens begin to shape policy and laws to create more fair judicial processes and decommodify Black, Indigenous, and people of color's bodies and labor in prison?
For sure. So first, I want to give Erica her flowers while she can still smell them. I think that she made the point about we didn't get into this problem by accident. So let's stop acting like we're going to wake up and this problem is not going to exist. Effectively saying we ain't getting by accident and we're not going to accidentally get ourselves out of it. I think in recognition of that theme, we clearly understand, I would hope, that we all have some fixing, some tweaking to do. But you said it correctly. I have the opportunity of working in the United States Congress here in Washington. I had the opportunity of working on some local campaigns in New Orleans and around Louisiana. And it led to me being able to take my story and my expertise to the Hill in order to hopefully make a difference in whatever way that we can. I think first things first with regard to this problem of mass incarceration, of the excessive punitive and prosecutorial practices that we're seeing across the country, I think that we haven't yet owned the problem. And I mean everyone, seriously, owning the problem, because I don't believe we take into consideration, quite frankly, enough of how everyone is impacted by incarceration. It's not just, Will Elmore. It's not just other Black and brown bodies, or now women, which is the current trend in Louisiana, now that we've largely incarcerated a lot of the Black men in the household. I think what we have to realize is rather you are incarcerated, rather you are a family member of someone who's incarceration impacted, or rather you are a taxpayer, the money that is going to fund and incarcerate and put into solitary folks that either don't pose a threat, or folks that are no longer the same people they were when they first got incarcerated, are stealing money from our healthcare systems and stealing money from our educational systems, which is yet again, putting into effect this cycle where our society is not investing enough in the social safety net or lifting communities out of poverty. Oftentimes in our political discourse, we talk about the need to improve the middle class. We haven't even started to address the working class or the impoverished or underemployed class. So I think those are all phenomenal first steps there that we have to take. I think when we begin to own this problem as our own and recognize that each dollar that's going to support the unjust incarceration, that's not going to fund healthier alternatives, more community-centered alternatives to incarceration, we're joking ourselves if we believe we're going to accidentally get out of this problem. But I think even before we acknowledge how we need to get out of it, we first have to acknowledge that the problem impacts each and every one of us. From the money that you're working hard to earn that's taxed, that's going to fund incarceration, from the money that's on collect phone calls, all of that money, small business owners, the money that my mother, that my brothers spent on maintaining a relationship with my father through visits in person where we could collect phone calls, postage for mail. All of that money could have very well gone to support a small business that was selling a product that we could have very well needed. This is everyone's problem. And I think that we have to genuinely, claim it. And once we claim it, do some self-reflection of saying, okay, we didn't accidentally get in here. Let's make sure that the solution that's going to ultimately lead us out of this pandemic, and I'm not even referring to COVID-19 and how that's exacerbated the severity of this issue. Don't even get me started there. I think when we begin to own this one, then we process it, we take it as our own, then we're acting and actively seeking out ways of which we can say, hey, let me make sure I'm protecting my dollar. Let me make sure that I'm keeping that father figure in the community. Let me make sure that I'm keeping that caretaker in the home where they better belong. I think that is ultimately going to lead us out of mass incarceration and hopefully into a more restorative form of tackling issues of criminalization and of wrongdoing where they occur.
I just wanted to jump in and sort of tie together Freedom's comment with Erica's comment. And Erica mentioned that you can draw a direct line from slavery through Jim Crow to mass incarceration. And I wanted to flesh that out and give credit to Michelle Alexander in her book, The New Jim Crow, because what you get from slavery, Civil War, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, then you get to the Civil Rights era and a renewed attention on freedom for Black and brown Americans, and mass incarceration starts then. So this era that we're living in, when we refer to mass incarceration, that has been going on for about 40 years, right? And so the percentage of people that we incarcerate looked nothing like this prior to the late 70s and early 80s. I don't know the statistic offhand, but I know that it has just grown exponentially. And so I think that's like a missing link, right? So as the civil rights movement was gaining momentum, it's almost as if the United States as a state needed to shift the burden of imprisonment to a new forum. And that is how we embarked on this era of mass incarceration. And just to amplify that statistic, that 70% of Maryland incarcerated individuals are Black. That was true in my class. I taught 25 students and 2 were white and 23 were Black. Also want to amplify what Freedom said, right? We have to own the problem before we can fix it. And so I just wanted to be really explicit about the racial pandemic that is mass incarceration. I think we can't get anywhere without understanding that piece of it.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So that brings me to another question. Since there is such a fundamental racial element to mass incarceration, it is inextricably tied to slavery. And we can go through the trajectory, it's already been done, but we can go through the trajectory of American history and see how slavery and mass incarceration are inextricably tied. We can talk about the convict leasing systems that have been created from slavery. Once the Emancipation Proclamation was enacted, the so-called freedom of slaves, air quotes, we can see then moving into the convict leasing system that where individuals who are supposed to be free went to jail because of Black codes, and Black codes for people who are unemployed, you get arrested for loitering, and then you are leased as a human being to serve out harsh treatment for your sentences, right? And so all of these things, and we can look at it from one step to another, and we can trace the trajectory of all of these things. My next question then is, knowing this and knowing that this is structural and systematic and intentional, right? My question really, I'm gonna ask Will, because you are one of our impacted individuals who are here, but really I want to throw this out to all of our panelists. Is abolition or reform the answer? What's the answer?
You always ask me these tough questions. What's the answer? It's I think both and. In a perfect world, we would abolish prisons. The nature of prisons, the nature of what it means to take someone away from what he or she is familiar with and isolate them is, I think, in the deepest way, is what festers the problem. The punitive aspect, the monetary benefit of doing such a thing, the fear mongering, war on crime, war on drugs, beef up the police department. Like the Mr. Freedom Richardson said, that budget is never tampered with. All these fears, man, all these improper suggested seeds that have been planted for hundreds of years about Black people, about race, and about white people as well, about power. All those machines are running at the same time, and they keep this system going the way it's always gone. And when you parallel mass incarceration with slavery, and we have these discussions, and we get to the top of the tree, and we're going to work our way down and try to get to the root, sometimes it's exhausting, because it's like it feels like you're taking a toothpick against a brick wall saying, I'm trying to get through this thing. And you feel like it's never going to work. However, I believe in judicial law and structure and order. I think we all need that. But the nature of our judicial system is a byproduct of racism and slavery. And the laws are saturated in this bias, this racial bias. And unfortunately, those of us that are ignorant to the law, we cross the line every day, not even know it. And we're taken advantage of for not knowing it. And because we don't have a lot of power to affect change and to change laws yet, we need more power and influence to be able to sit at the table equally in numbers so we can have our say. All those things need to be done, and there's part of getting them done is doing what we're doing now, having these conversations. So I hope I didn't sound like I'm hopeless. I'm not. But mass incarceration and slavery are like Siamese twins. Mass incarceration is the extension of it. And I like to tell people, how would you feel when you make a purchase on your credit card that costs X amount, and when you get your bill, it's multiplied by 10. You're on the phone, you calling people, you might even refute the whole charge. Since you try to take advantage of me, guess what? I don't want to pay anything. Erase it all because that was unfair. That's what prison has become. That's what prison is. It's a gross, egregious taking advantage of people that are already disadvantaged. And then I've been a part of convict leasing. As you learned my story, I was transferred. I committed no crime in Texas. I was transferred from North Carolina all the way to Groesbeck, Texas, to serve some of my time there. And you had to work. I was shackled on a plane from Raleigh-Durham United Airport all the way to Texas. And that's I read a lot of books about slavery that are very descriptive, but on a plane in shackles, which was pretty much structured like a slave ship, but it traveled through the air, looking around, seeing so many people that looked like me in full restraints, FBI, ATF agents, you name them, however many letters on planes with guns and weapons, making sure we behaved all the way to a strange place. And I couldn't have got more closer in a reenactment of what it felt like to be just kind of forcefully taken from one place to the next and told, hey, you're going to work on this plantation until your time is up. So more so than I let on, man, I kind of been through it and been down through it. And as a spiritual man, I remain hopeful that until people's hearts really change and we see each other as equals, we're going to always look for the advantage to have over one another. And again, that's the mother of this. It's not that Black people commit more crimes than anybody else. That's really not the facts if we want to speak truthfully. It's that people who sit in power, which is not a lot as far as numbers, they really believe in that over my dead body. And to maintain and sustain that power, they create this fear machine to keep other people who have a little less power and a little bit more political influence and things like that to keep it going. And they think that'll make them safer to keep guys like me in prison. However, I beg to differ. Having been in prison and been, live my life as a free law-abiding guy as well, I beg to differ. It's not true. We've been duped in that regard. And maybe I'm getting a little bit away from your question, but it's one and the same, man. And truly, you feel like a slave. You've been purchased by the state, and you're told to do what you're told to do, and you try to endure it until your time is up. And then it's even more egregious that because when your time is up, it's not over. You figure out how to pay for that purchase that you've been overcharged. It's not over. You've accrued interest on it now, so you still owe. And you start to feel like, man, I can't really win. So what do you want me to do? And then it's easy to drift into this other criminal mindset because the only way to get an advantage is to kind of become like they say that I am and live that self-fulfilled prophecy out.
Wow, my goodness. That's the power and the impact of story. And what you hear is the very thing that from Will is the narrative of his life. And that's the impact of all of this. That's how we humanize this story. And that's the first step to change. Frida, I'm going to toss it to you and ask you, abolition or reform?
I got to get in on that one. First off, Will, I am nothing but honored to share an albeit virtual stage with you. Your ability to put things into layman's terms is necessary. It is incredibly necessary. So thank you. with regard to your question, abolition and reform, I take two perspectives on this one. My father, having served 21 years for taking $5,000, I don't think the time fit the crime, and easily, I think that is reflective of millions of families in the United States. But my father can also tell you, having served 2 decades in prison, that certain people at times, until our society reimagines accountability, and until our society reimagines punishment, at times, in violation of a social contract, that's probably where some of them belong. I think I'll take a little bit of both. One, I think that we have to reform our criminal justice system and our prison system. I think that any prosecution, any sentence grounded in the fulfillment of a monetary opportunity, I think should not stand. I think that, yes, the issue, I don't think we, and I'm piecing together several thoughts here. The issue with reform is that the reform isn't ever delivered by the impacted party. And the issue, furthermore, is that the reforms that are recognized are always going to come from those that least stand to be impacted by the reforms. I'll put it in layman's terms like my man, Mr. Will, just did. Those that are not incarcerated should not dictate what humane and inhumane treatment looks like in a prison industrial complex. And oftentimes, and I can tell you this, having worked in Congress a brief amount of time, most of the bills or the reforms, and if I can be truthful here and excuse my French, we have a culmination of half-assed solutions that don't kick in for another 10 years. And at best, it's a Band-Aid treatment. Until we genuinely not just take a seat at the table, until we are a part of constructing the table that we're sitting at to convene a meaningful discussion on criminal justice reform and the restoration of humanity in those that make mistakes, because let's be real, all of us have made mistakes. It's just some of us have not been caught for ours, or some of us have not been held as accountable and been publicly shamed about the mistakes that they've committed. Because certainly those without sin, let them cast the first stone. I'm not in the faith world. I don't profess to be a pastor at all, but I'm just saying, I think all of us bear some degree of sin. All of us bear some degree of responsibility to some action that we don't claim proudly in public. So I think we have to obviously reform our criminal justice system. But the reforms this time, I think this is how we alter our approach. It can't be more white men in cloakrooms with cigars drafting these resolutions, drafting these solutions to decades old, persistent problems. And incarcerated communities are always a part of the bill signing process. What we need to be a part of is the bill construction process. And unfortunately, most of the solutions, you look at the First Step Act, or you look at legislation on the state level in Louisiana, you're talking about eliminating 10% of the prison population over 10 years, some of the legislation. That's 1% a year. I'm not a mathematician. Trust me, that's not what I graduated in. But I can tell you it just doesn't make sense. And we can't keep celebrating these half-assed reforms, especially reforms that do not center impacted communities in the construction of those bills, that legislation. So I think we can reform prisons without having to abolish them. But honestly, I think this brings about a very timely conversation in how we imagine punishment and how we can hopefully work to re-envision punishment in order to make sure that the sentence that we're giving someone meets the crime and is going to maximize the taxpayer dollar to keep them there. Are they graduating with trades and skills and craftsman-like abilities? In Louisiana, the only 4-year college degree that you can get at Angola State Penitentiary is that in theology, which means, putting it in layman's terms like my man, Mr. Will did, if you don't profess to be a pastor, or if you don't see yourself going into the faith community, the faith profession, what does a theology degree do for you when you're looking for a job immediately and the church isn't hiring? Until we reimagine and reconfigure how we not just sentence people to prison, but how we welcome them back home is instrumentally and consequentially important to our ability to undo this unjust, this racist, this inherently systematic and persistent problem that's all too often ripping our families apart. That was a lot, so unpack that how you best will.
No, I really appreciate that. And I'll just say this as a parenthetical pause. I know what it means to have a theological degree and not be able to find a job. I'm just saying. So as we, did you all want to share abolition or reform? Erica, did you want to share on that? We're coming to the end of our time, but I want to give you opportunities to share any of your insights.
Well, the one thing that I will say is that I think, I mean, the longer that I do this work, the more, abolitionism makes sense to me. But what I will say is no matter what sort of the answer is, the system isn't broken. The system is functioning as it was designed to function. And we have to remember that when we're talking about changing the system. And what we have to envision is that it is something different than we've imagined. It's not fixing a broken system. We have to be thinking of something different. When we talk about under the law in Maryland, the goals, when somebody's being sentenced, they will say the goals of sentencing are deterrence, punishment, and rehabilitation. But there's very little investment in that rehabilitation piece. And I think I, as an attorney, I borrowed a lot of money to go to a very expensive school to get a little bit of that power. I get to walk around. I'm from a blue collar family and say I'm a lawyer. So I'm a stakeholder. I stand to lose a little something when we're talking about shifting power and we're talking about who should have the platform to speak. But we have to be able to envision something that is different than what we've seen. We have to be able to envision something that makes us uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable, and the path forward is not something that is going to make people feel at ease. So, I mean, what I would say about that is that we have to have the courage to envision something that we haven't seen yet.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. And I'll just say one of my favorite thinkers in the world, if you haven't read her, her name is Audre Lorde. And Audre Lorde once said that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And so in trying to reform a system that is designed to do what it does, we have to use different tools and reimagine something that is different than what it is. So working from the inside out is not going to create, because all it's going to do is create another iteration of another new Jim Crow. Are y'all with me tonight? All right. So we're coming to the end of our time. It's now 8:12. I want to give Dr. Bianchini her opportunity to serve as the commentator to the information that we have shared as panelists, and then we'll open it up for questions to close us out. Dr. Bianchini.
I just wanted to thank Freedom and Will for sharing their stories, and Erica as well for sharing her story. As a theater professor, I am from the same school of thought as you, Reverend Adams. The storytelling is how we get to empathy and understanding. And education is such a gateway for that. It was such an honor to be able to teach at Jessup 2 years ago. I have had phenomenal privilege and access to education my whole life, and my 25 students there could not say the same thing. And it was really for many of them, it was the first time that they had access to a high quality education, and I could just see worldviews shifting through that. So I'm happy to hear from audience member questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We'll now open up for questions. Now, as we open up for questions, we have a mic here. So this is the mic that we'll be using for questions from the audience. Our panelists are here to take those questions. I will ask one bit or make one request. And that request is that you ask a question and not make a speech. All right, because we want to get as many people as possible to come and share or ask questions so that our panelists can provide detailed answers. Can you come up and to the mic, please? Thank you.
I just wanted to ask how connected do you think the war on drugs and the criminalization of all drugs is to mass incarceration during Nixon's presidency?
Great question. The question was, how is the war on drugs connected to mass incarceration? Any one of our panelists can answer that question.
I think we can, obviously, the war on drugs, I think, has a huge relationship to mass incarceration, and it's consistent with the idea of sort of who is meant to be taken up and taken out of society. You can see it with the sentences, especially federal sentences now that people are trying to go back and revisit. So I think it's played a huge impact. And even when you look at sort of sentencing disparities, right, between crack cocaine and powder cocaine, for example, and some of that is still being undone. And when we look at sort of for example, I had a client who became addicted to opioids when he had a back injury and then eventually transitioned to heroin. But the reason why we're sort of seeing a shift in society in terms of how society is looking at drug addiction, I think, is because who's being impacted, right? So now we've got more middle-class folks, more white folks who are struggling with an opioid epidemic. And so now our system is sort of seeing that and adjusting. But I think it's directly the war on drugs is, of course, connected to racism. Mass incarceration is connected to racism. So yeah, I think you make a great point. It's all part of this tool to pull out huge percentages of our population and steal them from society.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would also, yeah, please give it up. For our audience on Zoom, I would just like to let you know that if you have any questions from our Zoom platform, just use the reaction symbol to raise your hand. You can be unmuted and ask your question from that platform. I see some more hands coming up. For those who have questions, come on to the mic, ask your question. If you have a hand up, come on in the area in the middle aisle so that we can save time.
First, I want to just thank all the panelists for being here tonight. Really appreciate you guys. My question is for Freedom. I know you're on Capitol Hill right now, and I know we've talked about legislative shortcomings, but what legislative actions do we need to take to right this wrong of mass incarceration?
For sure. And what was your name? I'm sorry.
My name is Chris.
Chris, nice to meet you. I'm Freedom. I think that first off, you ask a phenomenal question. I think that I think too often we view our systems of governance as impaired and broken and shattered, or just quite frankly, inefficient. When I think really we just aren't using them appropriately. So something that any congressional office, any Hill staffer can talk to you about is the importance of phone calls. Every so often, whenever there's an issue that a large share of constituents feel strongly about, they have this tendency to bombard the phones to that respective congressional office. Or we have particular organizations that are against animal cruelty that send all of these mailers to our DC office. All of that are tools that oftentimes aren't utilized, that I think could be utilized more often, because the overwhelming of the phones or the excessive mail, eventually that gets to staffers who then forward it to members whenever you recognize trends and patterns. I'll go further to say also, I think that all too often we think that elections are on and off seasons. And for me personally, I don't profess to be any better civilian or engaged American than anybody else. But I think that elections aren't just, at the time when a ballot is cast. It's also when that person is in office, holding them accountable, paying attention to their voting record, and genuinely getting engaged and as enthusiastic about elections as we are at the presidential and national level, right? And I think that because young people particularly, I'm gonna call myself out as well, I think we're so driven by instant and immediate gratification that will go post and reshare something in our echo chamber where we already know folks agree with us, but we don't want to go stand in line to vote, or we don't want to take the time to register online, when we turn 18, or we don't want to put in the effort and the research to make sure that we're not just swapping out one bottle of wine for another with a different label, but that we're genuinely studying the ingredients and the policy positions of the wine in which we're drinking. So certainly, I think we have numbers of members of Congress. First off, know who your members are. 2, understand what issues and what priorities they have. And 3, everyone on your college campus, everyone your followers on social media, you are an influencer. People are going to do what it is that you ask them to do just because they like you enough. Maximize that platform and that influence that you have to get some folks together. As many of y'all are here today, I would hope that each of you saw something fitting, something, some reason to be here this Monday evening, as opposed to studying for an exam or being out on the town. Certainly come together, organize in order to bombard those phones, send those mailers, and certainly treat election season like it's a year-round activity and not just something that happens on a particular Tuesday. But thanks for your question, Chris.
Thank you, Freedom.
Yes.
Just like to say that Freedom just spoke to what we were saying at the beginning. This moment, get momentum and turn it into a movement. Remember that, moment, momentum, movement.
I just want to ask, when we're talking about racism and discrimination in a deeper perspective, how would you compare racial tensions between back then and now in modern day?
Can you repeat your question for me real quick?
What I wanted to ask is, how do you compare racial tensions back then and racial tensions today?
Yeah, either any one of our panelists can take this. How do you compare racial tensions to back before in the history prior to today's, and how do you compare it to today? Anyone can take that question, I'm sure it relates to mass incarceration and the connection between the two.
I'll speak briefly on this one, and then I'll concede space to some of my wiser panelists. I think that racism hasn't ever gone away. I think Will Smith put it perfectly as it pertains to policing. He says that, excessive uses of force and police misconduct didn't go away. It just became more visible because young people with our cell phones and the evolution of documenting events that we deem important or that we deem necessary to record are making its way into the public square and the public consciousness a lot more easily. But as it pertains to racial tensions in the past, I'll certainly welcome any of the other panelists that maybe experienced that has a little bit more wisdom on them and seasoning than I do.
I pretty much echo the same the same sentiments. This in my lifetime, I'm not that old, but looking back at history, the footage, and seeing what's going on now, it's like he said, it's more exposed through the technology. And again, I spent so much energy trying to figure this thing out. I realized that to an uncircumcised heart that's plagued with racism, we could have these conversations all day, all night. And we could show footage in high definition on big screens, downtown Times Square. Every billboard can show you some real graphic racist expressions. And for a moment, when we're so moment oriented, it'll get all our attention for a moment. And we'll print t-shirts and we'll unify and we'll stand together for a moment. But unfortunately, we fall asleep, man, when the master goes to pray for a second, man. We lose our focus until something else happens, and we lose our focus until something else happens. Not all of us, of course, and I don't exclude myself when I say anything. I really include me, because these things don't get the attention that it deserves until it happens to us. Then we want the whole world to stop and say, hey, pay attention. And then some of us said, man, that happened yesterday, man. Where were you? And I wish that wasn't the case. But again, I don't exclude me. This country is built on that. And this country is just it's pickled in racism. And the conversation I'm looking forward to having, maybe Scott will put it together and he'll invite me, is when can we start saying let's change the Constitution? Because we tend to act like it's indelible, it's divinely inspired. We know men that wrote it were racist. We know that Black people were not included in any of the beautiful, benevolent, eloquent, poetically arranged words. We know that it wasn't applying to us. Why won't we have that conversation about changing the Constitution that all political people, all legal people stand on and say it's my right to aspire to be in these positions? So hey, let's take that apart. Let's bring people to the table that's been affected by all of the indiscretions of the Constitution, all the lies it tells about justice for everybody. Let's rewrite that in a fair way. Let's bring everybody to the table and let them write a sentence or two and put their say to it. And then let's see how this country looks then. And when I say that, I never hear a response, because I don't know why. We've been indoctrinated to believe that document cannot be touched. God himself wrote it, and how dare you mention that? And I say, man, heck no, God didn't write that. Some old racist guys wrote it because they sat in power and they felt the way they felt, and we put it in a plaque and we write it on stone and we sit it somewhere and we honor it. I stand against it, man. You know, in my younger days, I tend to take a spray paint can and write some graffiti on it because it didn't benefit me. It didn't have me in mind. And that would be considered, that's probably illegal, desecrating a sacred document. I don't know. However, that's the conversation, Scott. When you put that together, man, I will.
Will, how many of you will come to that conversation? And we're going to invite you to campus, Will. And we're going to meet you and we're going to have that conversation. All right. You guys, a response from the audience. I'm going to put it together and we're going to have that conversation. All right. Appreciate you. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Listen, we are pretty much out of time. Yeah, I'm sorry. We didn't get a chance for you to ask your questions, but what you can do is send your questions to, you can send your questions to me, and we're going to put out an email with all of the resources, and we're going to have an email that will allow you to see a bibliographical information on books, lectures, videos, and all of the other informative things that we need to learn from this topic of mass incarceration. So you'll be getting that, and you can respond to that email with your questions, and we'll be sure to get them answered. So in the interest of time, we have about 3 minutes left. Here's what I want to do for our panelists, 30 seconds or less. I want you to share with us what the next steps will be. 30 seconds, I know that's a lot, but what can our specific next steps be? I'm going to start with Will, 30 seconds or less, and we'll close out tonight.
Commit to something that you believe in. Be relentless, be dogmatic, be radical. You don't have to get in any trouble, but purpose your heart to equality, equity, and justice for all people. If you believe in that, if you don't believe in that, man, please leave to those who do believe in that alone.
Thank you, Will. We're going to go to Freedom now.
I think the answer is simple on this one. Own this problem. This is a societal problem. I'm not calling you a racist. I'm not saying that your intentions are not pure. I am saying everyone in one way or another is affected by mass incarceration. Rather, you know someone that's incarceration impacted, rather everybody knows a family member that's impacted. I am hopeful that this discussion is what it takes to renew and refuel your motivation to do something, to own this problem and continue conversations like this. And where you have those conversations, where you build that momentum, we then start a movement.
Thank you, Freedom. Erica.
All politics are local. Our problems are local and bigger. So Maryland's legislative session begins in January, goes through April. Identify your senators, identify your delegates. If you are from somewhere else and you're connected to your politics back home, hold people accountable. Support those who you support, hold people who are taking action that you don't agree with, hold them accountable. become involved. We all have an opportunity to become involved.
And Dr. Bianchini, thank you.
I will say read Black Writers, read Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, read Ibram X. Kendi, Becoming Anti-Racist, and watch Ava DuVernay's 4-part documentary 13 streaming on Netflix.
Absolutely. If you haven't seen or listened or read those pieces, please do. Please make it a point to do that. Listen, this brings our panel to a close tonight. Can we give it up for our panelists? On behalf of the committee for the commitment to justice, we want to thank you all for coming out, investing your time, your energy, and your efforts, your talents and gifts to be here with us tonight. We sincerely appreciate your expertise. This is just the beginning. We're going to have some more conversations about this, and we're going to continue to discuss and find ways to change this system from a transformative perspective, not just reform. Is going to be transformed. And so I want to thank the committee that put this together. Committee members, please stand so the audience can see who you are. A lot of work went into this. Come on, y'all can do better than that. A lot of work went into this. We want to thank Events for all that you have done to make this possible. The hybrid system. I know it's not easy, but we want to thank you all. Events, come on, give it up for Events. We want to thank Messina for sponsoring this and being a part of this, CCSJ and Campus Ministry. We want to thank you for helping to put the word out for this important conversation and this important event. We want to thank our Zoom platform guests for joining us today. And most importantly, thank all of you for being here tonight, spending your Monday evening with us to have this conversation. We truly appreciate it. We hope you enjoyed it. We want to thank you, thank you, thank you. And please be mindful, as I said before, we will be sending out information, a bibliographical information, list of different books, articles, videos, all the resources that you're going to need to learn more about mass incarceration and the issues of justice and injustice that plague this society today. So again, thank you. This concludes. I hope I didn't forget anybody. If I forgot anybody, I tried to do a blanket thank you. So charge it to the head and not the heart. All right. So I thank you all. Blanket general thank you. Give our panelists one more round of applause. Will, Freedom, we appreciate you. Take care, and you all have a wonderful night.